The hum of the bunker's failing ventilation system was the only sound that filled the cold, sterile space. Marcus leaned against the steel wall, sweat slicking his forehead as he tried to ignore the hunger gnawing at his insides. His fingers twitched, yearning for the weapon that sat just out of reach on the table. It was always within arm's reach, just in case. After all, trust was a dangerous commodity in this world. Across the room, Lyra sat quietly, her alien features bathed in the soft, flickering light of the overhead lamps. She had been there for days now, offering him food and water, her large violet eyes following his every move with a strange, unsettling tenderness. The same tenderness that had kept him alive so far. And yet, she was an alien. A creature who, by all rights, should be his enemy. "You're still alive," she said, her voice lilting in a way that didn't sound quite human. It was soft, almost musical, yet filled with an odd undertone of urgency. "I'm not sure I want to be," Marcus muttered, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. The taste of metal lingered in the air, bitter and sharp. The alien food she'd provided had nourished him, but it was far from satisfying. His body screamed for something more substantial. Lyra's gaze softened as she placed a small container on the table between them. The white liquid inside shimmered faintly in the low light, its surface smooth and inviting. She had offered it to him before several times, but he refused each time. He didn't trust her, not yet. Not after everything that had happened. "Drink it," she urged quietly. "It's the only way you'll heal." Marcus's stomach twisted at the sight of the liquid. He wanted to refuse, wanted to ignore the intense, almost desperate hunger that gnawed at him. But his body betrayed him. His hand, trembling with fatigue, reached for the container, though his eyes never left Lyra's face. He had to admit, her presence was disarming. Despite everything he knew about her kind, Lyra had been nothing like the brutal invaders who had ravaged Earth. She had been kind to him, gentle even. But it was precisely that kindness that left him on edge. He could trust no one. But as the first drop of the liquid touched his tongue, an odd warmth spread through him. The pain in his chest, the aches from days of malnourishment, slowly began to subside. His vision, once hazy and clouded, cleared. The alien milk wasn't just nourishment, it was a balm for wounds he hadn't even known he carried. He pulled back, setting the container down with a shaky exhale. "What is this? What the hell are you trying to do to me?" Lyra's eyes darkened, her expression momentarily clouding with something that could almost be mistaken for regret. But then she hardened, her voice steady. "I'm trying to save you. You're not the first human I've helped, Marcus. But you're the first I want to." The silence between them stretched thin, the weight of her words settling like lead in the pit of his stomach. He had heard rumors, stories of human collaborators, of people who had sided with the aliens out of desperation, or worse, self-interest. Was Lyra one of them? Had she been sent here to manipulate him? "Why me?" he asked, his voice low, laced with suspicion. "Why help me?" Lyra stood, her graceful movements almost too fluid for human eyes to follow. She approached him, her gaze never leaving his. "Because, Marcus, you're not just any human. You're one of the last." His heart stuttered in his chest. One of the last? He had been so wrapped up in his own survival, his hatred of the invaders, that he hadn't stopped to consider the bigger picture. Earth had been decimated. He was one of the few remaining survivors, and the aliens, despite their brutal conquest, had kept him alive. "Don't get any ideas," Marcus growled, standing slowly. "I'm not some pawn in your game." Lyra's expression didn't change. "I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to survive." Survive. The word felt foreign on his tongue. He had stopped thinking about survival months ago, after the initial invasion. There had been too much death, too many battles lost. Survival was an afterthought now. But here, in this cold, sterile bunker, with only the alien girl for company, survival suddenly felt like a choice. "You're a part of this invasion," Marcus said, his voice hardening. "You're not innocent." Lyra's eyes flickered with something deeper, something more painful than he had expected. No, I'm not. But I'm not like them either. The flickering lights above them cast shadows over her face, making her seem distant and unreachable. Marcus clenched his fists, feeling the weight of her words settle into his chest. He didn't know if he could trust her. Hell, he didn't even know if he wanted to. But something about the way she said it, the vulnerability that bled through the cracks in her armor, made his resolve waver. A sudden noise from the ventilation system snapped him out of his thoughts. The bunker seemed to groan, like a wounded animal trying to survive against the odds. The lights flickered again, dimming to near darkness. Stay close, Lyra murmured, her voice now tinged with urgency. She reached out, her hand brushing against his arm. For a brief, almost imperceptible moment, he felt the heat of her touch, the subtle connection that had grown between them since they'd been trapped together. Something's wrong, Marcus said, his heart racing. The tension between them was palpable now, something heavier than their shared isolation, something more intimate. I know, Lyra replied. We're not alone anymore. As the words left her mouth, a faint, mechanical thrum vibrated through the floor beneath them. The bunker was no longer a safe haven. In the darkness, as the danger outside began to encroach on their fragile truce, Marcus realized something that chilled him to the core. He didn't know who the real enemy was anymore. The metallic clank of the bunker door echoed through the narrow hallway, a sound that felt both ominous and routine. Marcus tensed, his muscles coiling in instinctive defense as the sound signaled the arrival of something, or someone, he couldn't ignore. He had been here too long, too isolated to pretend the world beyond the bunker was still safe. Lyra stepped into the room, her silhouette framed by the flickering light, casting shadows that danced like specters across the walls. The moment she entered, her presence seemed to fill the room, heavy with an unspoken tension. She was his only company in this dark, lifeless place, and yet she was the last person he trusted. Marcus, still recovering from the alien milk, sat on the metal cot, his eyes narrowed as he observed her every move. The healing effects of the strange liquid had worked wonders, but his unease had only deepened. He couldn't deny that the pain had lessened, his strength had returned, but questions piled up in his mind faster than the answers Lyra was offering. She had saved him, twice now, but why? What was she expecting in return? Lyra didn't speak immediately. Instead, she placed something on the table between them, a small device, sleek and foreign, unlike anything he'd seen before. It was shimmering, with intricate patterns that pulsed with an eerie glow. The air around it felt charged, as though the device itself carried a force that commanded attention. What's this? Marcus asked, his voice rough. He could feel the intensity of the situation pressing against him like a weight. It's a communicator, Lyra replied, her voice calm, but there was an edge to it, something unspoken beneath the surface. You need to use it. The alien fleet is near. Marcus stood, the room spinning slightly as his legs protested the movement. He stepped toward the table slowly, wary, his fingers brushing the device as if it might bite. He studied Lyra's face, searching for any trace of deception, but her eyes remained unwavering. The fleet is coming here? To Earth? His words came out sharper than he intended, the thought of another wave of destruction threatening to unravel whatever peace had settled over the bunker. Lyra nodded, her gaze serious. They are. But not to destroy. At least, not yet. The words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. The aliens had already ravaged the planet, leaving a scarred, barren world in their wake. His instinct was to fight, to resist, yet here was Lyra, offering something he couldn't quite understand. Why should I trust you? His voice was quiet, though laced with anger. You're one of them. I'm not like them, Lyra said, her tone firm but not hostile. I never was. I'm helping you because I want to help you. She paused, as if weighing her next words. But you need to use the communicator. If you don't, they'll find us anyway. I can't stop them. Marcus's mind raced. Trust. It was a fragile thing, a weapon of both life and death. He'd survived this long by refusing to trust anyone, by locking himself off from the world. And now, here was Lyra, An alien who had done nothing but show him kindness, offering a tool that might lead to his salvation. Or his destruction. He couldn't decide which it would be. "Why help me?" he asked, the question tumbling out before he could stop it. "You've already saved my life once. Now you want to give me a way to talk to your people? I'm not asking you to trust me completely," Lyra said, stepping closer. The warmth of her presence filled the space between them. "Just trust that I'm trying to make things right. I know you don't owe me anything, but you're not the only one left here. There are others. There are ways to rebuild." Her voice softened, eyes searching his. "We can fix this together." Marcus's chest tightened. He hadn't seen hope in so long that it felt almost foreign to him. His fingers hovered over the communicator, hesitant. Could he really use this to rebuild? Or was he walking straight into a trap? "Help you?" Marcus's voice was quiet, almost a whisper, as though he was talking to himself more than to her. "I don't know how I'm supposed to help anyone. Hell, I don't even know how I'm supposed to survive." Lyra watched him carefully, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then, as if making a decision, she stepped even closer. The slight tremor in her hand as she reached for his arm didn't go unnoticed by Marcus. "I can teach you," she said, her words filled with an earnestness that pulled at something deep inside him. "We can figure this out. We can heal the wounds of Earth. But you have to trust me, Marcus. You have to trust that I won't let this world die." Her touch was light on his arm, yet it sent an unexpected shock through him. The sensation was almost human. The warmth of her hand, the softness of her skin, felt like something he hadn't experienced in years. The same warmth that had comforted him in the nights of endless terror, the same touch that had healed his injuries. Her alien nature should have repelled him, but in that moment, it didn't. His heart pounded in his chest, not with fear, but with something else. Something unfamiliar. And yet, he couldn't bring himself to pull away. "Why do you care about this world?" he asked, the question more for himself than for her. "Why save it?" "I told you," Lyra said, meeting his gaze with an intensity that nearly knocked the breath from his lungs. "Because I believe it's worth saving. And because I believe in you." The silence between them stretched long and heavy. There was a deep intensity in the air, a crackling current that neither of them could ignore. For a long moment, Marcus couldn't tear his gaze away from her. There was no more space for suspicion, only the weight of her words, her touch, and the strange but undeniable pull he felt toward her. Without a word, he reached out and grabbed the communicator. "I'll do it," he said, his voice low but firm. "I'll help. But you better not be lying to me, Lyra." A small, almost imperceptible smile played on her lips, and for the first time since he'd met her, Marcus believed it wasn't a mask. He wasn't sure what lay ahead, or if they could truly rebuild what had been lost. But in that moment, he felt something stir inside him, a flicker of hope. And with it, a dangerous, intoxicating pull toward the one person who had become his ally in this desolate world. He didn't know if he could trust her, but maybe, just maybe, he could trust the bond they were building. The communication device hummed faintly on the table, a soft pulse of light that beckoned Marcus. He could feel the weight of its significance, the opportunity to reach out to the alien fleet that loomed outside the bunker, just a few miles away. The uncertainty it represented tugged at him, gnawing at his resolve. He had never been good at trusting. Survival was easier when you didn't have to rely on anyone but yourself. Lyra stood a few feet away, her body language tense yet open, as if awaiting his decision. The quiet tension between them stretched, the air thick with unspoken words. Despite the proximity, it felt like an abyss lay between them, an emotional chasm that neither had been brave enough to cross. Marcus shifted, his eyes flicking from Lyra to the communicator and back again. It felt like a betrayal, somehow, even though the logic screamed that this was the only way to secure his future, and perhaps even humanity's. He had fought for so long, but now the rules of the game were different. The lines between enemy and ally blurred, and he hated it. "You think this is the right choice?" Marcus's voice was rough with frustration. The words felt alien to him, as though he were speaking a language he didn't quite understand. Lyra's gaze softened, her eyes never leaving his. I know it's the right choice. The fleet, they won't destroy us, not unless they have to. We can reach an agreement. I know we can. The sincerity in her voice almost convinced him, but his instincts screamed that it was too risky. Too naive. You can't promise that. They've already invaded. They've already destroyed everything. I'm not asking you to forget what they've done. Lyra stepped closer, her voice lowering. I'm asking you to see the bigger picture. To think about what we can rebuild, what's left. Together. Her words sent a shiver through him, a flicker of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Hope. But trust wasn't something you could simply hand over, and hope? Hope had gotten people killed before. Why are you helping me? Marcus demanded, his voice steady but with a harsh edge. Why go through all of this for me? For humanity? Lyra didn't flinch, even as the weight of his accusation hung between them. Her expression hardened slightly, but there was still something undeniably vulnerable in her eyes. I'm not doing this for you, Marcus. I'm doing this for us. Us? He scoffed, his emotions rising faster than he could control them. There's no us. I'm human, you're an alien. There's no bridge between us. Her lips parted as if to argue, but then she paused. A long breath left her, and her shoulders sagged with a quiet resignation. I don't care what you are, she said, her voice softer now, the words laced with an unspoken weight. I care about what we can be. The silence that followed her words stretched thin and tight, as though the entire world was holding its breath. Marcus didn't know how to respond to that. He had spent his life fighting, surviving by a code that demanded he never rely on anyone. And yet, here was Lyra, standing before him with a sincerity that felt both foreign and familiar at the same time. Was it possible that she saw something in him that he didn't see in himself? Look, Marcus muttered, running a hand through his disheveled hair. I don't know what you want from me. You've already saved my life once. Twice if you count this. He motioned toward the communicator, his fingers brushing the device's smooth surface. But I don't want to owe you anything. I'm not asking you to owe me, Lyra replied, her voice unwavering. I'm asking you to help me. Help us all. This war, it doesn't have to end with destruction. There's a chance to make it right. Her words hung in the air like a delicate thread, pulling at the edges of his resolve. He turned away, crossing the room to the small window that looked out onto the barren landscape. The world beyond was dead, a desolate wasteland where the remnants of human civilization lay shattered, just like the lives of those who had fought and fallen. But it wasn't entirely gone. There were pockets of survival, small, fragile things, and maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to rebuild. Marcus's fingers curled into fists at his sides, his heart pounding in his chest. He had survived the worst humanity had to offer, but this was different. This wasn't a fight against faceless invaders. This was a fight against the deep, gnawing loneliness inside him, the fear that there was nothing left to fight for. He took a breath, steadying himself, and turned back toward her. And if I don't want to help? What then? What happens if I don't use the communicator? Lyra didn't flinch. Then we all die. It's as simple as that. Marcus's gaze hardened. That's not a choice. Not for me. Her eyes darkened, but there was no anger in them, only a quiet understanding, a resignation that matched his own. It's the only choice we have left. A long, tense silence passed between them, the weight of the moment pulling them both deeper into the reality of their situation. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about making a decision that would shape the future of the planet, of their relationship, and of everything they had left. Fine, Marcus said finally, his voice rough but resolute. I'll use the damn communicator. But don't think for a second that I'm doing this for you. Lyra's expression softened slightly, the hint of a smile playing at the corners of her lips. I wouldn't dream of it. His gaze met hers, the moment hanging between them. The future was uncertain, the path ahead unclear, but one thing was undeniable. they had to take this step. Together. The hum of the communicator seemed to vibrate louder now, as if it were waiting, as if it knew something they didn't. And for the first time, Marcus couldn't tell whether he was ready for the consequences, or if he ever would be. The hum of the communicator was all that filled the room, its pulsing light casting an almost ethereal glow over Marcus. His fingers hovered over the surface, the device now warm to the touch as if it had come alive with the weight of a decision too heavy to make. It was surreal. Just hours ago, he had been prepared to die alone in this bunker, trapped in a world he barely recognized. And now, Lyra was asking him to make a choice that could change everything. His breath hitched as he glanced at her, standing in the corner of the room. She was watching him, as calm as ever, though her eyes betrayed the subtle tension running through her. She had never asked for his trust, but she had given him hers in the most dangerous way possible, by showing him her vulnerability. By asking for something she didn't have the right to. Marcus took a deep breath. What happens if I use this? If I reach them, if I contact the fleet? The question hung between them like a thread ready to snap. Lyra moved closer, her footsteps silent on the cold metal floor, her presence as undeniable as the looming uncertainty. If you don't, she said quietly, nothing changes. The war continues, and humanity will die out. If you do, if you take a chance, maybe we have a shot. Maybe we can talk them into stopping this, into seeing us as something more than just a footnote in their conquest. Marcus shook his head slowly, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. You're asking me to trust them, to trust you. I'm not asking you to trust them, Marcus, she said, her voice sharp but gentle. I'm asking you to trust me. I've already lost everything. The fleet, my people, they don't understand what it means to rebuild. But I do. Her gaze softened. I understand that you're afraid. I am too. But we're both still here. That counts for something. He watched her for a long moment, the weight of her words sinking in. She had been alone too, just like him. Her people had wiped out most of his kind, and yet she was still standing here, offering something he couldn't quite grasp. Was it kindness? Or something more? You've been lying to me. The words slipped out before he could stop them. You're not just a survivor, are you? You're part of this alien fleet. You're a soldier, sent here to finish the job. Lyra's expression faltered only briefly, but her eyes didn't waver. I wasn't always a soldier. I'm not like them. Then what the hell are you? Marcus growled, his fists tightening as frustration bubbled up. What's your angle? What's in this for you? I'm not asking you to like me, Marcus. Her words were quiet but firm. I'm asking you to understand. I didn't want this war. I didn't want any of it. She took a step closer, her voice trembling with an emotion she could no longer hide. I just want to make it right. The sincerity in her voice hit him harder than any blow he could have expected. She wasn't lying. He could see it in her eyes, the same helplessness that mirrored his own. Both of them had been caught in a war they never asked for, struggling to make sense of a future that seemed all but lost. The tension between them shifted, an unspoken understanding passing through the air. Marcus felt his anger dissolve, replaced by a simmering confusion and a growing, unexpected sense of connection. He was no longer looking at an alien, a symbol of the destruction that had torn his world apart. He was looking at a person, someone who was hurting just like him. He exhaled, his shoulders slumping. You think there's hope? After everything that's happened? After everything they've done? Lyra nodded, her eyes unwavering. I do. Because I've seen what happens when we stop fighting. We lose. But if we fight differently, if we fight for something more than survival, then maybe, just maybe, we can change the world. The silence that followed stretched thin, like the calm before a storm. Marcus looked down at the communicator, his hand still hovering above it. His heart hammered in his chest, his mind whirling with the enormity of the decision he was about to make. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, suffocating in its intensity. It was no longer just about him. It was about everything, the future of humanity, the chance for redemption, and whether or not he could truly trust Lyra, the one person who might hold the key to salvation. "How do I know you're not lying?" His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. "How do I know you're not just using me?" "You don't," she said softly, a faint sadness in her voice. "But I don't need you to trust me. I just need you to take a leap of faith. If we fail, then I'll die too. And that's something I'm willing to risk." The room felt colder then, and Marcus could feel the weight of her words settle in the pit of his stomach. For all her resolve, for all her insistence that she was doing this for the right reasons, Lyra was still an alien. She was still part of the force that had wiped out so many lives. And yet, he couldn't help but feel the pull between them, an attraction that transcended species, a shared sense of loss that bound them together in a way he couldn't explain. His fingers brushed against the smooth surface of the communicator. The decision was almost too easy. He could walk away, ignore the possibility of peace, and continue living in the shadows of the past. But the cost of that life would be more than he could bear. Lyra was right. If they didn't try, they would lose everything. The finality of his decision echoed in his chest. Slowly, he pressed his hand against the communicator, feeling the warmth spread through his fingers as it activated with a soft click. The room seemed to hold its breath as the device came to life, the screen flashing with unknown symbols and alien language. "Let's see what they have to say," Marcus muttered, more to himself than to her. Lyra didn't answer, but her eyes softened with something akin to relief. The quiet weight of their shared moment hung in the air, the beginning of something uncertain, something they had both been too afraid to embrace until now. And somewhere, in the deep silence of the bunker, a new chapter was beginning.